Hey everyone, Somber here. It's been a few versions of my Warhammer mod since I did a video going through the patch notes, but version 2.1 has got quite a few uh, large changes in it, so I thought I would do a video and just go through them. I know people quite appreciate these videos, so let's go through the notes. So, starting off, the biggest changes covered in the general changes. Nations which previously had Chaos recruitment or Death recruitment on pretty much all their guys now use the Beastmen model instead, which is to say they lose the Chaos and Death recruitment discounts from all of their recruitables, and they have normally priced recruitables. So instead of something being 80 gold cost, and then that being halved if you're in Turmoil 3 or in Death 3, whichever scale was appropriate for the nation. Instead of that, it's going to just cost 40 gold, um, and there's some other changes that kind of still incentivize you going towards Turmoil and Death, and that is that your Dominion is going to generate Turmoil or Death naturally, so anywhere that you've got Dominion will just start moving towards Turmoil 3 or Death 3. So the reasons for this, well, there's a few of them, but the main one is that a lot of players I was finding were either confused or a bit annoyed by the fact that when you moved outside of your dominion, that is, you took your troops that had been less gold in Turmoil 3, if you're playing as the ogres, for instance, and you took them outside into out of your dominion into lands like if one of your neighbours had order scales instead of turmoil scales, then their upkeep would go up considerably, and that was kind of confusing people and irritating them. So it was effectively punishing you for invading and moving outside of your order and into, outside of your dominion into order or growth nations, which is actually quite unintuitive when you think about like orcs and goblins or ogres or the chaos nations that have this turmoil. They should be invading the order nation. They should be invading the empire or the elves or the lizardmen or something like that. That's incentivized to take order scales. So them costing more when they're doing it is kind of the opposite of what I would want. Some other benefits are that we can improve the parsing of how much things actually cost and avoid players feeling bad about recruiting outside of forts where they are less likely to have Turmoil or Death 3. So if you're playing as the Ogres, a lot of the time you would go, oh, I want to recruit some Ogre Bulls in this particular province. It hasn't got a fort. One of the strengths of the Ogres is that they can recruit, outside of forts they can get Ogre Bulls. But then they go, oh, but I don't have Turmoil 3, so they're actually quite a lot more expensive than I would have to pay for them in a field. So maybe I don't want to recruit them at that price. So the end result is that Turmoil and Death 3 is still a clear pick for those nations. So those nations are the Turmoil ones are Black Crag, Bone Nose Tribe, Ogre Kingdoms, Slanesh, and Khorne. Those are all the Turmoil nations. All of their dominions increase Turmoil, so it still makes sense for them to pick Turmoil 3 as their scales, because then they're not. If you pick Order 3, you're going to end up with some level of Turmoil anyway. I don't think you'll be at Turmoil 3, but you'd be at Turmoil 1 or 2 maybe from the automatically generated turmoil from your dominion. So they shouldn't play very differently from before, but it should be a nicer experience with fewer annoyances. So that's the general change. So moving on to national changes, these just in alphabetical order. So first, Bretonia, a tweak. Various knights had their map moves slightly decreased, although they're still more mobile than normal cavalry. They had too high a map move, basically. They were moving as quickly as very light cavalry, very fast cavalry, and they should be moving more like medium cavalry. They've got special horses, but they're not that special. Another tweak, the Fey Enchantress had her casting speed bonus reduced from 100% to 50%. It was just a bit too strong before, so she was too strong of a hero to get. The Dark Elves have had death recruitment discount removed from their death hag. So this is part of the more general changes, but also I don't particularly want to push Dark Elves towards death scales, and she was the only thing, the death hag, that had that death recruitment discount, and it just felt a bit weird and didn't really make sense, so I just removed it. Moving on to the dwarfs, the runic ward shields. So these were shields that were given by various rune items that you could forge, like the rune of Valaya, the rune of Grimnir, and so on. So those have been removed because it turns out that they could be stacked. So you'd have multiple shields all up at once, which is kind of weird and was causing them to be, you'd very likely just hit a bunch of shields and hit extremely high protection if people had some of those runes up. So instead, they now give +2 defense, which is very similar to the braces of protection. That's in addition to their main ability. Each of the runes does something. Like the rune of Valaya gives you rejuvenation and a bit of self-healing, the ability to get rid of your own afflictions, and a little bit of regeneration as well. So yeah, they just give a little +2 defense, it's a little extra bonus. The Rune of Valaya now gives Wound Defend +1 because it gives you regeneration 2%, and it turns out that was actually, if the formula on the wiki are correct, it was increasing your chances of getting afflictions, which is a bit weird. Heavy Crossbow Dwarf now has a lighter hatchet instead of an axe, so I previously already moved the Crossbow Dwarf to having a hatchet instead of an axe, and now the Heavy Crossbow Dwarf is in the same situation. He still costs more resources and has heavier armor, but he just has this weaker version of their axe, so they're less good as just pure infantry. The Dwarf Arbalest, which is the weapon used by the Heavy Crossbow Dwarf, had its damage reduced by 1. It's still 1 more than a regular Arbalest, but that's all. And both Crossbow Dwarf recruits get iron caps instead of half helmets. So again, just making them slightly worse as kind of infantry. They were basically, in addition to being really good at range, they were in melee combat. They were kind of similar in performance to like medium to heavy good infantry, which was a bit much basically. The Ironbreaker's iron-breaking ability was greatly changed and now activates far more often. Basically, it hadn't been changed going from like Dominions 3, and it had a bunch of unnecessary stuff in it. And yeah, it's just been simplified and it now activates a lot more. So the Ironbreakers actually can smash people's armor up, especially if they don't have magic armor. So the Empire, a couple of fixes. The Middenheim hero, Valmir Raukov, now spawned with Ungol Horse Archer troops correctly. That had been broken in the previous version. And Middenheim's preview site for Knightly Orders no longer shows the Griffin Legion because, of course, I added Kislev in version 2, and they get the Griffin Legion as recruitables and as a hero instead of them being a Knightly Order for Middenheim. Some tweaks. The State Crossbowmen now wear chainmail cuirass armor, which reduces their resource cost considerably, which means that you can actually mass crossbows now for all of the Empire nations. So yeah, crossbows available, and of course you are perfectly capable of doing flaming arrows and wind guide as well with the Empire, so I would expect the crossbow to be more of a feature for those nations now. The Middenheim Huntsman supply bonus was increased. It just wasn't enough. They were basically able to feed themselves but no one else, so now they can help feed other people, so it makes a bit more sense. Middenheim Hunting Hounds no longer require any upkeep at all, no gold upkeep, and their recruitment limit was decreased from 10 to 5, so you can't recruit quite as many of them, but of course they don't require upkeep. So they're decent, even though I believe they're undisciplined. They're okay as patrollers just because they don't require any upkeep, so you can make use of them like that. And the Middenheim Huntsmaster, his gold cost was increased from 60 to 80, but he now automatically summons 2 hunting hounds per turn. So Middenheim now has this system where they can get free hunting hounds and they don't cost any gold upkeep, which is kind of cool for them. That's in addition to spawning a bunch of them in combat, of course, which the Huntsmaster always did. The State Swordsman gold cost was reduced from 11 to 10. People have been telling me for a while that they don't really want to recruit the State Swordsman, and I had decreased the gold costs of some of the other state troops, so hopefully this makes the Swordsman slightly more attractive. I think he's relatively attractive as a medium infantry with a the old broadsword and basic shield, and then he's got decent protection. The tribute to the Knights of the Winter Throne was decreased in gold cost from 800 to 700. This is partly because I've taken a bunch of stuff away from Middenheim recently, and I kind of want to emphasize some of their national features a bit more. In future versions, I might give them some more unique things. They do still have some unique things. They have huntsmen and huntsmasters and hounds. But yeah, they lost the Kislev troops that they previously had, so the Winter Throne Knights being a bit cheaper means that they can consider them as possibly a sacred option a bit more often. The Greenskins nations, no changes to their individual troops and things, it's just the big general change that they now generate turmoil in their dominion, but their troops and commanders no longer get a turmoil discount, instead costing what they previously cost in Turmoil 3. So that's the same thing I was talking about in the general change, that's just mentioning it for the Greenskins. For the High Elves, the Fire of Avalorn, which was the secondary effect on the bow from the Sister of Avalorn, the Handmaiden of Avalorn weapons, and their spears as well, I think, just reduced in damage from 8 to 6 because it's armor-piercing fire damage, and it's holy, which means it's trebled if you're hitting undead or demons. And treble 8, 24 armor-piercing damage is a bit too severe, whereas triple 6, it's 18 armor piercing damage, still good, but not quite so crazy. So just tone that down a little bit. Khorne, same as the Greenskins, generates turmoil. You don't get a turmoil discount anymore. We've already covered this, but yeah, it should simplify things for Khorne, and that's also true of Slaanesh down here. Kislev. So I had added Kislev in version 2. I'd gotten some feedback they were a bit too weak, so there were some changes to them there. And I also changed the way that the bear trainers work. So firstly, a fix. The avatar summons were in the blood school because of a typo that I'd made rather than conjuration. So I've now put them back and they've got 30 morale, which was always intended for them, as opposed to I think it was 10 in the previous version, but they were always supposed to have 30. The Ungol Horse Archer gold cost was reduced from 18 to 16, hopefully making them attractive. Horse Archers in Dominions are not terribly attractive in general, and missile weapons that don't have armor piercing also tend to not be super attractive. So maybe they even could reduce them more. I'm not sure, but 16 gold is somewhat cheap now for a mounted unit that's not particularly good in combat because it doesn't have the protection, but it has a falchion, it can hit hard, and its defense is fairly high. And of course, you've got that pretty decent composite bow. The Griffin Legionnaire rec points decreased from 48 to 46. That's not terribly a big change, but just to normalise them with some other kind of elite cavalry. The Griffin Legionnaire defense was increased from 11 to 12. It was always supposed to be at 12. It was kind of just a mistake. It was at 11. And their magic resistance was increased from 10 to 11, so making them feel a little bit more elite than they were. They were a bit underwhelming before. The Winged Hussar, I think they're not actually called Winged Hussars, I think they're called Winged Lancers. But anyway, the Winged Lancer rec points were decreased from 42 to 36, which is in line with things like Middle Era Tianqi's Imperial Cavalry, so kind of like medium cavalry that aren't super elite, gets that lower number of rec points. They've got that. Boyars got chainmail rather than scale mail because they are fancy lads, so they get to have better chainmail. The Bear Trainer gold cost was increased from 110 to 140, and the unrest reduction from Bear Trainers no longer stacks. It had turned out that Bear Trainers were basically just way too good before, and they would just give you this constant supply of Sacred Bears at too low a cost. So I've just made them more expensive. They were a bit too good before, and too much of a warping element on the nation where you just try and get as many Bear Trainers as you could. Excuse me. The Knight of Ursun gold cost was reduced from 70 to 65. I may want to reduce this further. I'm not sure. They're not amazing as Sacred Heavy Cavalry, but I want to be careful I don't make them too cheap. And of course, you can only get one per turn. They're rec limited. But yeah, Knight of Ursun gold cost. And then the Frost of Kislev damage was increased by 1. This was just because the Frost of Kislev, while it's like a minor version of Falling Frost, if you go too low damage on these kind of things, they just end up not being able to do anything, just kind of wounding stuff but not killing anything. So just making it slightly better and a little bit more attractive, especially since it's a national spell. Ungol Horse Archers and Lancers get +1 defense to represent their superior riding skills. Yeah, just an overall buff to the how well those units do in melee now, the Horse Archers and Lancers. And Winged Lancers and Griffin Legionnaires now have lesser fear on their Lancers. I had always thought that this wasn't represented in the rules in Warhammer, that they didn't have. So it's mentioned in the descriptions of like the winged units for Kislev that their wings make this kind of horrible wailing sound as they charge into battle, and I think that that's something that was said of the real life, historical winged hussars that were used in Poland and around that era of Europe. And it would kind of like scare the enemy, but I don't want to give them fear. So I was looking at what I could give them, and I thought that there was nothing in the rules in the actual Warhammer Armies Kislev supplement that was released by a White Dwarf supplement for the tabletop game. But when I looked at it, they actually did have a thing where they caused a kind of fear. I think they got like a bonus to their combat resolution for the first round of combat or something. But anyway, there's precedent in the rules of the tabletop game. So I gave them lesser fear on their lances. To be honest, it's the same fear that's on the like ancestor weapons that late era TNGs like ancestor cavalry have. It's not a very strong effect at all. It won't matter very often, but sometimes the Winged Lancers and Griffin Legionnaires will be a bit better at breaking formations when they charge. They'll cause things to rout. I also added the Norse Dwarf Warrior, which I will show you in a moment, and the Kossar War Wagon. So let's have a look at those in Dominions. Right, here we are. Here is the Kislev roster. So you can see that I have added the Norse Dwarf Warrior. Let's look at him first. So 20 gold, 27 resources, limited recruitment. What limit is that? 5 per month. So you can get 5 Norse Dwarfs each month if you want, but they are somewhat expensive. What do you get for that? Well, you get a very nice, good quality heavy infantry. Protection 18 is nice to have. They've got relatively good stats being dwarfs. They have the typical thing of the 1 siege bonus and 2 cast defense bonus that dwarfs have, and the dark vision 50%. They've got mountain survival, snow move, and cold resistance. And they have good quality, their armor's good quality, you can see from the high protection, and they have the quality Great Axe, which hits extremely hard. So I think the Norse Dwarf Warrior, nice if you need to hit very hard, nice if you want good protection, but of course they are somewhat expensive at 20 gold, 27 resources, and limited recruitment. How many recruitment points do they actually cost? 10 recruitment points because they're kind of like mercenaries. I think maybe I should put that recruitment point cost up, so I might make a note there that I would put those up, because while they are effectively acting as mercenaries, I think maybe a few more recruitment points might be fair for them. So you could recruit, you can see there, you can get 5, and then you're not allowed any more each turn. But Norse Dwarf Warriors, a good addition to the Kislev roster, giving them a good quality heavy infantry. And then the Kossar War Wagon. So the Kossar War Wagon is much like a big chariot with missile weapons. It is 130 gold, 114 resources, so very expensive in terms of resources, and 90 recruitment points, so just very expensive. Very similar to the War Wagon used by Nuln, the Empire faction, and you can have 1 per month. It doesn't have the protection that the Nuln one has, and it doesn't have the armor-piercing missile weapons that the Nuln one does, but it does have a lot of missile fire it puts out. It rolls along, it uses its pole arms to defend itself with repel, it crushes things with its trample, and then as it takes damage, 1 horse dies and it slows down, a 2nd horse dies and it becomes immobilized. It can still fight with its melee weapons, it can still shoot, but it can't move anymore, it can't trample anything. So very similar to the Nuln War Wagon, but a little bit less expensive and lighter, basically. If it survives, it will replenish its horses after battle. So yeah, you'll have to let me know how you get along with the Kossar War Wagon, but I think they're quite fun. Having a big size 5 rather. Actually, maybe this should be size 6. But anyway, they're size 5 tramplers, and they are quite capable of squishing things rather nicely. And these repel weapons tend to actually do okay for them, the Kossar polearms. They tend to repel things okay. So going back to the changelog, the Lizardmen, a couple of simple changes here. The ward scale of a shottle no longer has charged body. This basically was not acting the way that I... So to explain the ward scale of shottle, it's the leader of the sacred spawning of Saurus warriors that have like bubbles around them. And the ward scale, the leader one, has his own bubble, and when he got hit, he would have a charged body effect go off. But a lot of the time it was just doing damage to him and kind of killing him because he didn't have shock resistance in his 2nd form. And basically it was just acting weird, so I got rid of it. The second tweak is to the Saurus Cavalry, which I had been evaluating their performance recently, and they used to be like a really commonly used expander, and they were really great, and people just used tons of them. And they were too good, basically. So a change that I made to them was that, like a lot of the other cavalry of that type, I had it so that the rider and the mount are kind of like separate. If you do enough damage, you kill the rider and the mount fights on for a bit and then runs away, or at the end of the battle you don't get to keep them. Consequently, their hit points were a lot lower because it was just representing the rider's hit points rather than the rider plus the mount. And I had reduced their gold cost, but I think not enough because 55 was just too much. 45 is still more expensive than a lot of other cavalry, and they will not outperform, like heavy cavalry with very heavy armor. They're a lot cheaper in resource cost though, so I hope that this moving them from 55 to 45 will make them a bit more attractive. The Ogre Kingdoms, same change as the other ones, Slaanesh, Khorne, and the Greenskin Nations, which is Black Crag and Bone Nose. They generate turmoil in the Dominion. Their troops and commanders no longer get a turmoil discount. And I think this is particularly good for the Ogre Kingdoms because it lets you reliably recruit those foreign recruit Ogre Bulls and things like that for them, which is really nice. The Sabertusk supply bonus was increased from 3 to 4 because Sabertusks were not giving you enough extra supplies, and Ogre Kingdoms always have food problems. People were trying to use Sabertusks to mitigate those food problems, and they weren't really helping very much. So I've made them a bit better on that front. And then Gorger hit points have been decreased from 50 to 44, and the natural prot increased. Basically, it felt a bit weird that they had so many hit points, and they were a big bag of hit points with not much protection. And it made them very swingy. Like if you could get protection buffs on them and things like that, them having more hit points was more relevant than their built-in protection. And I prefer it this way around, basically. So lost a bit of protection, more than 10% of their hit points rather, and they gained a bit of protection. Moving on, Slanesh, same as the other Turmoil nations, they generated a Dominion and the discount's been removed, so that it's working simpler, smoother than it was previously. The Tomb Kings, now this is actually a pretty big change that's happened here. I would say very much on par, in fact, perhaps a bigger change than the Turmoil nations and Death nations. So, firstly, they do have the same thing with the death recruitment discounts removed. Dominion now increases death regardless of scale, so same as the Turmoil nations, but for death, so that applies to the Tomb Kings and to the vampires. But also their entire statuary troop lineup, so that's all of their Ashabti, their Necropolis Knights, their Tomb Scorpions, and their Sepulchral Stalkers. Those are no longer recruitable. Basically, people were making armies almost entirely out of those and not really using the undead troops that much. And the solution to this was basically they don't get them as recruits anymore. They've already got them all as summons, so now you have to summon them. It may be that the summons are not attractively priced enough, so I'm going to be reviewing that in the next version. But yeah, this is a very major change, and we'll see how it works out, as I've written in the log there. So let me know what you think of this. I think that some people are really going to miss them, but the Tomb Kings are supposed to be about these big undead armies, of skeleton warriors, and not so much about the statue troops, but I still want people to be using them, so hopefully they will still be used. The research level of the various summons was decreased by 1 each, so you can get them earlier and you can get them rolling, but of course they do cost gems, and I think maybe I'm going to give Tomb Kings a different distribution of gems in a future version, so that they get more Earth gems rather than. I think at the moment they get 3 Death gems, 1 Earth gem, 1 Fire gem, and I might make it 2 Death, 2 Earth, 1 Fire from their capital to help them make statues. Death recruitment discounts removed. We covered that. Oh, and the Tomb Glaive, which is used by a few things, got an attack bonus reduced by 1, and the biggest impact of this is on the Tomb Guard with glaives, but it does impact the Ashabti with glaives as well. Basically, the Tomb Glaive was just perhaps a little bit too strong previously. So, moving on to the vampires. Now, the vampires have had quite a few changes recently. I've been getting a lot of feedback. They have consistently been basically too strong. Certain things the vampires have just been too good. And so, this continues the tradition of them basically getting a bunch of nerfs and changes. So, firstly, death recruitment discounts removed. Dominion now increases death regardless of scales. There is a thing with vampires where people are constantly tempted to take growth 3. Now, if you took growth 3, you may end up with like death 1 or something, but since you start on death 3, you would be spending 6 scale points on that. So I would say, even though I've removed the death discount, you do generate death in your turmoil no matter what your scales are. Don't take growth. It's not a good idea. People are going to try and tell me if it is, but it isn't. Some Sylvanian levy troop commander gold cost decreased slightly to make them a little bit more attractive. The Sylvanian levies were basically being used by no one, so I'm trying to incentivize their usage a bit. The ancient weapons used by Graveguard, Black Knights, and White Kings were further weakened stat-wise. Now, they'd already been weakened a bit, but I hadn't really gone after the main thing that was good about them, which is that they've got the kind of stat line that you would expect really good magic weapons, well, I say good magic weapons to have. And really, the fact that they were magic is supposed to be in itself a bonus. The stats of the weapons aren't supposed to be that much better than just normal weapons. So as I've said here, they're further weakened stat-wise, and being magic is already a significant benefit, so I think that's fine. And the Graveguard and Black Knights were too good, particularly the Graveguard previously. So the Graveguard are going to get some other nerfs in here. Regeneration was removed from most vampires and reduced on the Bestial Strigoi and the Crypt Horrors. Generally, there is more reliance on draining over regeneration. So in Dominions and in a lot of stories of vampires, they are able to just regenerate. I've decided that they should be able to regenerate basically by draining. They should have to be like biting the enemy or using their magical powers to drain life from the enemy in order to regenerate. They do regenerate in a sense in that they've got these self-healing abilities to get rid of affliction. So over time they can slowly regenerate their wounds, but in the short term they need to be draining people. And I think that is going to make them less overpowered, and hopefully it will make them a bit more interesting and make the items that you might need to put on them to use them to like take over entire provinces and things on their own a bit more interesting too, rather than just being like, well, I don't need to gear this guy a minor bless, and we'll just go and take provinces with him. Yeah, it was just a bit too strong, that level of regeneration. And that was on top of the draining that they had. So Graveguard, they have had their defense reduced from 11 to 10 because 11 was a bit high for undead that don't have particularly good initiative and are a bit kind of slow in things in the Warhammer world. Their plate hauberk has been switched for the rusty plate hauberk, and their gold cost has been put back to 20 from 22. I put their gold cost up a bit, but it wasn't really having enough of an impact, and so these changes to make them significantly worse. So they've got worse weapon, they've got worse armor. It's only 2 protection points worse, but rusty plate hauberk instead of the normal plate hauberk, and their defense is slightly reduced. So they're more fragile now, but they, I think, are still very much worth building and still good troops. They're just not the be all and end all. They're not like so good that you just want to constantly put your money into them instead of other things. Their resource cost is slightly higher. I think it's only like 1 or 2 points. That doesn't make that much difference. Black Knight similarly had their defense reduced, base defense. Of course, they are mounted, they get bonuses and things. And their resource cost was increased slightly because they've got the barding. Their ancient plate hauberk, which was magic armor, has been switched for a normal plate hauberk. The White King still gets the magic plate hauberk, though, the ancient plate hauberk instead. The Blood Dragon capital site, which gives you experience. Excuse me. Sorry, just having a bit of a cough there. The Blood Dragon capital site that previously gave you 4 experience each time you used it now only gives you 3 experience. Basically, it was just sometimes tipping over a bit too much if you were just using it to train the Imperial aspirants to turn them into young blood knights. That was just happening a little bit too quickly, so I've just made it a bit slower. It's supposed to really be more of a flavour thing than really a big feature of the nation, but it's still there. There was a 1 point strength reduction to the Blood Dragon, Young Blood Knight, and Blood Drake. Basically, their strength was very, very high, and I've just reduced it slightly. And the Young Blood Knight, that differentiates it a bit more from the normal Blood Knight, makes them a bit worse. The normal Blood Knight, and they were performing extremely well even against enemy heavy cavalry. So I've just put their gold cost up a bit from 90 to 100, and we'll maybe review the Blood Knight more in the future. But 100 gold each now, like. Their performance is good, but people can still just hit them with like dust to dust, and they just die. So the fact that they're more expensive is, makes that more of a problem. Similarly, the Blood Drake gold cost increased, but of course they've had some nerfs elsewhere and in the previous versions. The Bretonnian aspirant was made basically identical to the Bretonnian Knight Errant, so a few changes to his stats, and he is now undisciplined. But his gold cost has been decreased from 40 to 35, and I think that these are now a more interesting thing to build, the Bretonnian. Yeah, so I think the Bretonnian Aspirant is now kind of interesting to build, maybe useful as an expander. We'll see. Let me know what you think of them. And now, Larmian noble consorts can be promoted into Larmian consorts. So this is the long awaited by me, at least. So I don't think anyone else really cared about this, but I always wanted the Larmians to be able to turn their like human consorts, their lovers, who are kind of their military leaders, into vampires eventually. Because the Larmian bloodline, while it is most known for female vampires and it's the Larmian sisterhood, they also do have some male vampires. They're just not as common and they're not given as much power. So you can now get those, and I'll show you those in a moment. And Larmian mercenary troops were reduced in gold cost a bit. They don't cost very much in terms of recruitment points or resources. It's pretty much just gold, and I've reduced their gold costs because I don't think anyone was making use of the Larmian mercenary troops at all, and I want them to be viable at least. So, yeah, the Larmian consort vampire was added to the Larmian capital lineups. You can either get them by having noble consorts that get promoted into them, or you can get them by just recruiting them if you've got a Larmian capital. So I'll show you the Larmian consort now. Here we go. So here is the noble consort, 100 gold, 24 resources, 2 commander points, and he's your kind of mundane, like tier 2 leader of mortal troops. He's got leadership 80, they can do formations, he's got nice equipment, he's got okay stats. He can get promoted if he manages to get 50 experience, and then once promoted, an event the next turn will turn him into a Larmian consort. They cost 200 gold and are much better stat-wise. They have very similar equipment and everything, but then they also have magic. They have Blood Mage level 1, Death Mage level 1, Air Mage level 1. So not super useful paths, but of course you can do some stuff with them. You could mist form them maybe, skeletal body. The Blood Mage, well, you could do a bit with the blood maybe, but you do get the basic vampire stats of a bit of invulnerability. You get recuperation and so on. So yeah, Larmian consorts. An extra recruitable. I don't think that they're terribly exciting. They're really there more for like as a flavor thing. But yeah, hopefully people make some use of them, and at least perhaps you'll get some noble consorts promoted. But we'll see. If no one uses them, maybe I'll reduce them in cost, basically. So, moving on, we have the last of the changes, the Wood Elves. So, the Waywatcher Longbow, I think, was overperforming a little bit. We'd already increased in version 2 the cost of Waywatchers, I think, went from 25 gold to 30 gold. But their Longbow was also just kind of overperforming a little bit because it gets half strength bonus, it has very high damage already. So I decreased the damage from 9 to 8. And it may be that the Waywatchers need more changes in the future, but for now, hopefully, this just makes them a little bit less overly strong, let's say. And then finally, I have added Ariel as a unique summon, so we should go and take a look at that. I'm really happy with her sprite. Let's have a look, see what that looks like. So here is Athel Lauren's research. If you go to Conjuration, we can see their various summon spells. And at level 8, so expensive in terms of research and expensive in gem cost, 17 H gems, you get Rouse the Queen in the Woods, summons the unique commander Ariel the Queen of the Woods. This ritual can only be cast in a forest. This spell may only be cast in the Wood Elf capital where the ancient glade site is present. Actually, I think this ritual can only be cast in a forest but is not true, so I should remove that bit because yeah, I think you can cast it in your capital no matter what, but you need the ancient glade site to be present, as it says there. But yeah, you get the Queen of the Woods. Let's go and take a look at her. So if we want to see her, if I go to the Protectors of the World, I can see the national overview. And then if we look in the Wood Elf Summons and Other, Queen of the Woods, here she is. Look at that cool sprite. I'm really happy with that. Yeah, she is very powerful. She does a lot of different stuff. She's got Fear and Awe. She is sacred, permanently blessed because she's a Dominion spreader like a prophet. Priest level 3, Nature 4, Astral 3, Earth 2, Water 2, Air 3. So lots and lots of spells that she can be casting. She is fast to cast things than most of the Wood Elves because she's not a spell singer, but that does mean she behaves differently in Communion choruses if she goes into those. She has glamour, floating, flying, ethereal. She is a magic being, but very high magic resistance. Very high poison resistance, cold, a little bit of fire resistance, and very high shock resistance. And she is invulnerable. She does have not very good protection, and she doesn't have a chest slot. So you have to be careful, keep her out of harm. Basically, she's a battlefield or outside of battles magic user, not really a like super combatant or anything like that. Yeah, she's there for casting spells, even though she's got Fear and Awe. She casts Divine Blessing and creates 2 temporary nature gems on battle start. So yeah, 2 temporary nature gems each time, which is nice for casting battlefield nature spells over and over again in lots of battles, and casting Divine Blessing. Is she worth going up to research level 8 in Conjuration and then spending 70 nature gems to get her? I'm going to leave that up to you to decide. Possibly she is overcosted, but I need to kind of be careful with these ridiculous magic paths she has and the fact that she's flying and everything. She has excellent map move as well. She can leap around the map quite a bit. Oh, and I've just noticed that she's got Encumbrance 10, which she is not supposed to have. So I'll definitely be patching that in a future version. She's supposed to have Encumbrance, I guess, 2. But obviously I didn't put a value in there. It's just set it to 10. So yeah, that's something that I'll have to fix. That is everything for this changelog in 2.1. Obviously, it's been a while since I've covered one of the changelogs. There's various previous changelogs to look through. If you're interested in seeing that history of all of the changes, you can see that in the DM text file that makes up the code that the mod is made out of. You can always take a look at that. I record basically all the changes I make. Sometimes I'm just like, I made some stat changes to this unit to make them better, but generally they're pretty specific. Anyway, that's everything I have to say. I will be doing another national overview or something like that in the nearish future. I like making videos. I will be making more, but recently just been quite busy. So catch you next time, and thanks for watching.